The water looked deceptively calm that afternoon in late August of 1882. The surface of the San Joaquin River glinting like hammered copper under the relentless California sun. And Florence Nash had no idea that stepping into its current would nearly cost her everything. She had arrived in Wasco only 3 weeks prior, having traveled by train from Philadelphia with little more than her teaching certificate, 2 trunks of belongings, and a desperate need to escape the suffocating expectations of a society wedding her parents had arranged. At 22 years old, Florence had chosen freedom over security, and the small agricultural town in Kern County seemed like the perfect place to disappear into a new life. The schoolhouse needed a teacher, and she needed a purpose beyond being some wealthy man's ornament. The heat that summer was brutal, turning the streets to dust and making every breath feel like inhaling from a forge. Florence had grown accustomed to the way her high-collared dresses clung to her skin, the way her dark hair frizzed despite her best efforts to pin it properly, and the way the local women looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. She was an outsider, educated and unmarried, and that made her both fascinating and dangerous in equal measure. Preston Young had noticed her the first Sunday she attended the small church service, though he had been too covered in trail dust and too aware of his own rough appearance to introduce himself properly. At 26, he had spent the last 8 years working cattle drives up from Texas, saving every dollar he could toward buying his own ranch. He had finally secured a small spread just outside Wasco, nothing fancy but good grazing land with access to water, and he was building something real for the first time in his life. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and pale blue eyes that seemed almost startling against his tanned face. His hands were calloused from rope work and hard labor, and he moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was capable of. Most of the unmarried women in Wasco had set their sights on him at one point or another, but Preston had always been too focused on his work to pay much attention, until Florence. There was something about the way she carried herself, spine straight and chin lifted, that spoke of both refinement and rebellion. She did not simper or flutter her eyelashes like the other young women. When she looked at him during that church service, her gaze was direct and assessing, as though she were measuring his character rather than his prospects. It unnerved him and intrigued him in equal measure. Their first real conversation happened at the general store, where Florence was attempting to purchase supplies for the schoolhouse. The proprietor, a gruff man named Silas Mort, was giving her trouble about extending credit until the school board payments came through. "I do not see why this is such a difficulty," Florence said, her voice crisp with frustration. "The board has assured me the funds will arrive by the end of the month." "That is what the last teacher said too," Silas replied, crossing his thick arms. "He left town owing me $17. Preston had been standing near the back of the store, collecting nails and other supplies for his fence repairs, but something about the exchange made him step forward. "Put it on my account, Silas." Both Florence and the proprietor turned to stare at him. Florence's dark eyes narrowed slightly. "That is entirely unnecessary, Mr. Young, Preston Young." He touched the brim of his hat. "And it is not unnecessary if it gets you what you need for those children. I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." "Did not say you were not." Preston kept his tone mild. "Just offering a bit of help between neighbors." Florence looked like she wanted to argue further, but Silas was already tallying up her supplies and adding them to Preston's account. She pressed her lips together, clearly displeased with the situation, but finally gave a stiff nod. "I will repay you as soon as the funds arrive. No hurry." Preston collected his own purchases and tipped his hat again before heading toward the door. He could feel her watching him as he left, and something about that gaze made the back of his neck warm in a way that had nothing to do with the August heat. True to her word, Florence appeared at his ranch exactly 2 weeks later with $17.35 in an envelope. Preston was breaking a young horse in the corral when he saw her approaching, sitting straight-backed on a borrowed mare that looked half asleep in the afternoon heat. He secured the horse and climbed over the fence, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Miss Nash, did not expect to see you out this way. I told you I would repay the debt." She dismounted with practiced ease, which surprised him slightly. He had not taken her for an experienced rider. "This is the full amount plus interest." There was no need for interest. There was every need. She held out the envelope, and when he took it, their fingers brushed briefly. Florence pulled her hand back quickly as though burned. "Thank you for your assistance. It was very kind." Preston tucked the envelope into his shirt pocket without counting it. "Would you like some water before you ride back? It is a long way in this heat." Florence hesitated, propriety clearly warring with practicality. Finally, she nodded. "That would be appreciated." He led her to the small house he had built, little more than 3 rooms and a porch, but sturdy and well-made. Inside was marginally cooler, and he poured water from the pitcher into a tin cup. Florence drank gratefully, and he found himself watching the way her throat moved as she swallowed, the way a few damp tendrils of hair clung to her neck. "You have built a good home here," she said, glancing around the sparse but clean interior. "How long have you had this land?" "Bought it 8 months ago. Still building it up, getting the herd established." He poured water for himself. "You settling in all right in town?" "Well enough." Something flickered across her face, a shadow of loneliness perhaps. "The children are eager to learn, which makes the work rewarding. Though I confess the heat is rather more intense than I anticipated. You get used to it eventually. Where did you come from originally?" "Philadelphia." The word came out flat, discouraging further inquiry. Preston recognized the tone. He had his own past he did not care to discuss in detail. "Long way from home. This is home now." Florence set down the cup with a decisive clink. "Thank you again, Mr. Young. I should be getting back before dark." He wanted to ask her to stay longer, to keep talking, but he could see she was already retreating behind that wall of proper manners. "Ride safe, Miss Nash." Over the following weeks, they kept running into each other in ways that might have seemed coincidental if Preston had not been deliberately timing his trips to town to coincide with when school let out. He told himself he was just being neighborly, checking that she was managing all right, but the truth was he found himself thinking about her at odd moments during the day, wondering what she was doing, whether she was lonely in that little room she rented above the boarding house. Florence, for her part, tried very hard not to think about Preston Young, which meant she thought about him constantly. She had come west to escape romantic entanglements, not to develop feelings for a cowboy with calloused hands and a quiet smile that made her stomach flutter in entirely inconvenient ways. She reminded herself that she valued her independence, her work, her freedom to make her own choices. Getting involved with a man, even a kind one, meant risking all of that. But then September arrived, bringing with it slightly cooler temperatures and a harvest festival that the whole town anticipated eagerly. Florence had been persuaded by several mothers to attend, despite her general preference for avoiding social gatherings. She wore her best dress, a deep green that brought out the warmth in her dark eyes, and tried to tell herself she was not hoping to see anyone in particular. Preston spotted her the moment he arrived, standing near the food tables and looking vaguely uncomfortable as the local banker's wife chattered at her. He made his way through the crowd, nodding to neighbors and deflecting attempts to pull him into conversations, until he reached her side. "Miss Nash," he said, and saw the relief flash across her face. "Afternoon, Mrs. Kingsley." The banker's wife looked between them with open speculation. "Mr. Young, how lovely to see you." "I was just telling Miss Nash about the quilting circle, though I suppose that is not quite her sort of activity." "I would be happy to attend," Florence said, a bit stiffly. "My schedule is simply quite full with lesson planning." Of course. Well, I will leave you young people to chat." Mrs. Kingsley bustled away with a knowing smile that made Preston's jaw tighten. "Sorry about that," he said quietly. "Small-town gossip is a particular kind of sport around here." "I had noticed." Florence glanced at him, and he saw a hint of amusement in her eyes. "Though your arrival was rather fortuitous. I was running out of polite ways to explain that I have no interest in discussing quilting patterns. Not much of a quilter. I can sew when necessary, but I prefer reading to needlework, which apparently makes me quite peculiar." Preston grinned. "I will let you in on a secret. I would rather read than quilt too." That surprised a laugh out of her, bright and genuine, and the sound did something strange to his chest. "I suppose we are both peculiar then." "Guess so." He offered his arm. "Want to walk around?" "Might be less awkward than standing here waiting for the next person to interrogate you." Florence hesitated only a moment before slipping her hand into the crook of his elbow. The contact sent a warm shock up his arm, and he wondered if she felt it too. They walked slowly around the festival grounds, watching children play games and men compete in roping contests. It felt comfortable and right in a way Preston had not experienced before, as though they had done this 100 times already. "Can I ask you something?" Florence said after a while, her tone careful. "You do not have to answer if it is too personal. All right. Why ranching? You seem educated enough to have other options." Preston considered the question. "My father was a gambler and a drunk. Left my mother with 3 children and nothing else when I was 14. I worked whatever jobs I could find, ended up on a cattle drive at 16. It was hard work, but honest. No one cared who my father was or what he had done. They only cared whether I could do the job." He paused. "Out here, you can build something real. Something that is yours because you earned it, not because you inherited it or schemed for it. That matters to me." Florence was quiet for a moment, and when he glanced at her, he saw something soft and understanding in her expression. "I think I know what you mean, about wanting to build something real. That why you came west, partially." She took a breath. "My parents wanted me to marry a man 30 years my senior because he had the right connections and family name. I tried to be dutiful. I truly did. But when he kissed me at our engagement party, I felt nothing but revulsion. So I broke the engagement, applied for teaching positions as far from Philadelphia as possible, and left." Her voice dropped. "My father told me not to come back unless I was ready to apologize and accept my proper place. So I suppose I have no family now." Preston stopped walking and turned to face her. "Their loss." She looked up at him, and he saw the sheen of tears she was fighting to contain. "You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are brave enough to give up everything comfortable for a chance at something true. I know you care about those children you teach, that you are stubborn about paying your debts, and that you do not suffer fools gladly." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "That is more than most people ever know about each other, even after years." Florence closed her eyes briefly at his touch, and when she opened them again, something had shifted between them, some barrier had cracked. "I was trying very hard not to care about you, you know." "How is that working out?" "Terribly." She laughed, shaky and soft. "Absolutely terribly." Preston smiled, and it felt like his whole chest was expanding, filling with something warm and bright. "Good, because I have been trying the same thing and it has been a miserable failure." They stood there for a long moment, people moving around them, music playing somewhere in the distance, and it felt like they were in their own private world. Then a group of children ran past, shrieking with laughter, and the spell broke gently. "Would you like to get some food?" Preston asked. The ladies from the church made their famous peach cobbler. "That sounds perfect." They spent the rest of the festival together, and by the end of the evening, everyone in Wasco was convinced they were courting. Florence found she did not mind the gossip as much as she had expected. Preston walked her back to the boarding house as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. At the door, he said, "Could I call on you properly? Take you to dinner, maybe go riding. I would like that." Florence hesitated, then added, "Preston, I should tell you something. I left Philadelphia because I wanted control over my own life. I am not looking to simply exchange one set of expectations for another. I am not asking you to." His voice was steady and sincere. "I am just asking to spend time with you, get to know you better. No expectations beyond that." She searched his face and found only honesty there. "Then yes, I would very much enjoy spending more time together." He tipped his hat, that quiet smile playing at his lips. "Good night, Florence." "Good night, Preston." She watched him walk away, his long stride eating up the dusty street, and felt something she had not expected to feel again after leaving Philadelphia. She felt hopeful. Over the next month, they settled into a pattern of courtship that felt both traditional and entirely their own. Preston would ride into town most evenings after finishing his work, and they would walk together, talking about everything and nothing. Florence told him about the books she loved, the dreams she had of maybe starting a proper school one day, with real supplies and a library. Preston shared stories about the cattle drives, the places he had seen, the hard lessons he had learned about trust and loyalty. On Sundays after church, he would take her riding out into the countryside, showing her the land he loved. She proved to be an excellent rider once she had a decent horse under her, and he enjoyed watching her face light up as they cantered across open fields, her laughter carried back on the wind. They were careful about propriety, always staying in view of others, never giving the town too much to gossip about. But there were moments when their hands would brush and linger, when their eyes would meet and hold, when the air between them would crackle with possibility. Preston wanted to kiss her so badly it ached, but he was determined to do this right, to give her the respect and time she deserved. It was late September when everything changed. The heat had finally broken, giving way to cooler days, and Preston had invited Florence to come see his ranch properly, to have dinner and see the work he had been doing. It was perhaps slightly improper, being alone together at his home, but Florence had agreed readily, eager to see more of the place he talked about with such pride. He picked her up in his wagon, and they drove out as the afternoon sun slanted golden across the fields. The ranch looked beautiful in that light, the small house neat and welcoming, the barn sturdy and well-maintained, cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. "Preston, it is wonderful," Florence said, taking it all in. "You have built something truly impressive." "Getting there," he said, helping her down from the wagon. His hands spanned her waist, and he was acutely aware of how perfectly she fit in his grasp, how right it felt to touch her. He released her reluctantly. "Want to see the rest before dinner?" They walked the property, Preston pointing out improvements he had made and plans he had for the future. Florence listened intently, asking intelligent questions that showed she was really paying attention. He found himself talking about dreams he had never voiced before, about maybe expanding the herd, about building a bigger house someday, about creating something that would last. "You will do it," Florence said with quiet certainty. "I have no doubt." "Would be easier with a partner," he said, then immediately felt heat rise to his face. "I mean, most ranchers have wives who help with the work, keep the books, that sort of thing." Florence's lips curved in a small smile. "I see. And do you have anyone in mind for this partnership?" Preston stopped walking and turned to face her. His heart was hammering against his ribs. "Might have someone in mind, though I worry she values her independence too much to want to tie herself to a ranch and a cowboy. Perhaps you should ask her and find out." Florence's voice was soft, but her eyes were bright with something that looked like hope. "Florence." He reached for her hand and she let him take it, her fingers curling around his. "I know we have not been courting long. I know you came here to build your own life, make your own choices. But I need you to know that you have become the most important part of my days. I wake up thinking about you and go to sleep the same way. And if you want to keep teaching, keep your independence, I would support that. I just want to be part of your life in whatever way you will have me. Preston." His name came out trembling. "I feel the same way. I tried not to, told myself I did not need this, did not want the complication. But you are not a complication. You are the first person who has ever made me feel like I could have both things, love and freedom, like they are not mutually exclusive." He lifted his free hand to cup her cheek and she leaned into the touch. "Can I kiss you, please?" He lowered his mouth to her slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, but Florence rose up to meet him, closing the distance between them. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, learning the shape and taste of each other. Then Florence's arms came up around his neck and Preston pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, pouring every ounce of feeling he had into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Florence, not because you should or because anyone expects it, but because you want to, because we are better together than apart." "Yes." The word came out without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her again, and it felt like sealing a promise, like stepping into a future that was bright and real and theirs alone. They decided on a small wedding in late October, just a simple ceremony at the church with a few close friends as witnesses. Florence continued teaching, because it mattered to her and Preston meant what he said about supporting her work. They spent every available moment together, planning and dreaming and falling deeper in love with each passing day. But the California heat, though broken by fall, had one last surprise in store. An unseasonable warm spell hit in mid-October, sending temperatures soaring back into the 90s. The land, which had just begun to recover from the summer drought, turned brittle and dusty again. Water sources that had been reliable started running low. Preston noticed his cattle bunching near the creek that ran through his property, seeking relief from the heat. The San Joaquin River, which flowed several miles to the west, would have better water, deeper and cooler. He started driving small groups of cattle there every few days, letting them drink and cool off before bringing them back. On the day everything changed, Preston had planned to take another group to the river. Florence had asked if she could come along, wanting to spend the day with him despite the heat. He had hesitated, knowing the work would be hot and dusty, but she had insisted. She was going to be a rancher's wife, she pointed out. She might as well learn what that entailed. So they set out early, driving about 20 head of cattle toward the river. Florence sat her horse well, helping to keep the cattle moving in the right direction. Preston watched her with a mixture of admiration and affection, amazed all over again that this incredible woman had chosen him, had agreed to build a life together. They reached the river just before noon, and the cattle immediately waded in, drinking deeply and standing in the shallows to cool themselves. Preston dismounted to check the herd, making sure none had wandered off or gotten stuck in mud. Florence dismounted as well, leading her horse to drink. "It really is beautiful here," she said, watching the water flow past. "I can see why you love this land. It gets in your blood after a while," Preston agreed, coming to stand beside her. "The space, the freedom of it." Florence smiled and reached for his hand. They stood there for a moment, fingers intertwined, watching the cattle and listening to the rush of the river. It should have been perfect, peaceful. Then one of the younger steers, spooked by something, bolted from the shallows and crashed into Florence's horse. The animal reared, yanking the reins from Florence's hand, and she stumbled sideways. The bank, undermined by the current and turned slick with mud, gave way beneath her feet. Preston heard her cry out, saw her arms pinwheel as she tried to catch her balance, but gravity and momentum were against her. She fell backward into the river with a splash, and the current, stronger than it looked, immediately grabbed her. Florence. Preston was running before his mind fully registered what had happened, racing along the bank as the current pulled her away from shore. He saw her surface, gasping, her heavy skirts already dragging her down. She went under again, and terror, unlike anything he had ever known, seized his chest. He ran harder, boots pounding the earth, calculating angles and currents with the part of his brain that was not screaming her name. She surfaced again, arms flailing, and he saw the panic in her face as she tried to fight the water. The river was not particularly wide, but it was deep in the middle, and the current was deceptively swift. Florence went under a third time, and Preston knew with cold certainty that if she went down again, she might not come back up. Her dress was waterlogged, pulling her into the depths, and she was tiring fast, her movements becoming less coordinated. He did not stop to think about the danger or the logistics. He just kicked off his boots mid-stride and launched himself into the water, hitting it in a flat dive that took him toward where he had last seen her. The current grabbed at him too, trying to pull him along, but Preston was strong and he knew how to read water, knew how to work with it instead of fighting it. He went under, eyes open despite the murk, searching desperately. For one horrible moment, he saw nothing but brown water and drifting sediment. Then he caught a flash of green, her dress, and he kicked toward it with everything he had. She was sinking, unconscious or nearly so, her eyes closed and her body limp. Preston grabbed for her, his hand closing on empty water the first time as the current twisted her away. He surged forward, lungs starting to burn, and reached again. His hand found hers. He closed his fist around her wrist and pulled, wrapping his other arm around her waist and kicking hard for the surface. They broke through together, and Preston gasped in air while trying to keep Florence's face above water. She was not breathing, and his heart nearly stopped. "Florence, come on, stay with me," he said urgently, swimming one arm toward the bank while keeping her head up. The current fought him, but he was fueled by pure desperation. He managed to angle them toward a fallen tree that jutted into the water and grabbed a branch, using it to pull them into the shallows. The moment he could touch bottom, Preston lifted Florence in his arms and carried her to dry ground. He laid her down on the grass and turned her head to the side, pressing on her back to force water from her lungs. She coughed weakly, then more strongly, river water pouring from her mouth. "That is it, breathe," Preston said, his voice shaking. "Come on, Florence, breathe for me." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. She coughed again, her whole body convulsing with it, and Preston supported her through it, one hand rubbing her back while the other held her steady. When the coughing finally subsided, she drew in a deep, rattling breath. "Preston." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I am here. You are safe. I have got you." He gathered her into his arms, holding her close, feeling her heart beat against his chest. His own heart was still racing, adrenaline making his hands shake now that the immediate danger had passed. Florence clung to him, shivering despite the heat of the day. "I went under. I could not get back up. The water was so strong. I know, but you are all right now." He pressed his lips to her wet hair, breathing in the scent of her beneath the river smell. "You scared 10 years off my life, but you are all right. You jumped in after me." She pulled back enough to look at his face, and he saw tears mixing with the river water on her cheeks. "Preston, you could have drowned too. Did not even think about it." He cupped her face in his hands, needing to touch her, to reassure himself she was really alive and whole. "I saw you go under, and all I could think was that I had to get to you. Nothing else mattered. You saved my life. You are my life." The words came out raw and honest. "Florence, if anything had happened to you, I do not know what I would have done." She kissed him then, desperate and grateful and full of all the fear and relief they were both feeling. Preston kissed her back, one hand tangling in her wet hair, the other pressed against her back, holding her as close as humanly possible. They were both soaked and shaking, but none of that mattered. All that mattered was this moment, this connection, the miracle of both of them being alive and together. When they finally broke apart, Preston helped her stand on shaky legs. "Can you ride? We need to get you home, get you warm and dry." "I think so." Florence looked around and spotted her horse, which had wandered back and was grazing calmly as though nothing dramatic had happened. "What about the cattle? I will come back for them later. Right now, you are the priority." He helped her mount, then swung up onto his own horse, which had stayed ground-tied through the whole ordeal like the good cow pony he was. They rode back toward town slowly, Preston keeping a close eye on Florence to make sure she did not falter. She was clearly exhausted, slumping in the saddle, but she stayed upright and alert. They made it to the doctor's office just as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. Dr. Samuel Hayes was an older man who had seen everything the frontier could throw at him, and he took one look at them both and ushered them inside without questions. "She nearly drowned," Preston said, helping Florence down from her horse. "Went under 3 times. I got her out, she coughed up water, but I want to make sure she is really all right." "Good thinking." Dr. Hayes guided Florence to an examination room. "You wait out here, Mr. Young. I will check her over and let you know." Preston paced the small waiting area, still dripping water onto the floor, his heart refusing to settle back into a normal rhythm. The memory of Florence sinking beneath the water, of those terrifying seconds when he could not find her, kept replaying in his mind. He could have lost her. If he had been even a few seconds slower, if the current had pulled her further away, if his hand had not found hers in that murky water, he could not finish the thought. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Dr. Hayes emerged. "She is going to be fine. Some bruising, a lot of shaking and exhaustion, but her lungs are clear and there is no sign of serious injury. She needs rest and warmth, but she will make a full recovery." Preston sagged against the wall, relief so intense it made him dizzy. "Can I see her?" "She is getting dried off and into some spare clothes. Give her a few more minutes." When Preston was finally allowed in, he found Florence sitting on the examination table, wrapped in a blanket and wearing a dress that was several sizes too large, clearly borrowed from the doctor's supply of charity clothing. Her hair was down, drying in waves around her shoulders, and she looked small and vulnerable in a way that made his chest ache. "Hey," he said softly, crossing to her side. "Hey yourself." She managed a tired smile. "Dr. Hayes says I am going to be fine, thanks to you. I am just glad you are all right." He sat beside her and carefully put an arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him immediately, resting her head against his chest. "Florence, I have never been that scared in my entire life. I know. I was fairly terrified myself. Her voice was muffled against his shirt. When I went under that last time, I thought it was over. I tried to swim, but my dress was so heavy and the current was so strong. Everything was going dark. She paused, her hand gripping his shirt. Then I felt your hand close around mine, and I knew you had me. I knew I was going to be all right because you would not let me go. Preston tightened his hold on her, emotion clogging his throat. Never. I will never let you go. They sat like that for a long while, just holding each other, both of them processing how close they had come to tragedy. Finally, Dr. Hayes cleared his throat from the doorway. Miss Nash needs proper rest. I would recommend she stay somewhere she can be monitored tonight, in case any complications arise from the water in her lungs. She can stay at my ranch, Preston said immediately. I will watch her. The doctor raised an eyebrow. That might not be entirely proper, given you two are not yet married. With respect, doctor, I do not much care about proper right now. I care about keeping her safe and making sure she recovers. If people want to gossip, let them. Florence lifted her head from his chest. Preston, I do not want to damage your reputation. My reputation is not even a fraction as important as you are. He looked at the doctor. Is there a medical reason she should not stay at my place? I have a spare room, and I promise I will be a complete gentleman. Dr. Hayes studied them both for a moment, then sighed. Medically speaking, she needs rest, warmth, and someone to check on her through the night to make sure she does not develop a fever or breathing difficulties. Where that happens is less important than it happening. Just be aware that people will talk. Let them, Preston said firmly. Florence looked between them, then nodded. All right, but Preston, that spare room better actually be a spare room. It is, I swear. He helped her stand, keeping a steadying hand at her elbow. Let me get you home and properly cared for. They rode back to his ranch as twilight settled over the land, painting everything in shades of purple and gold. Florence sat in front of Preston on his horse this time, and he kept one arm securely around her waist, hyper-aware of her every breath and movement. She was warm and alive against him, and he sent up a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever force had guided his hand to hers beneath the water. At the ranch, Preston helped her down and led her into the house. He built up the fire despite the lingering warmth of the day, wanting to make sure she did not catch a chill, and heated water for tea. Florence sat wrapped in a quilt, watching him move around the small kitchen. You are very domestic, she observed, a hint of amusement in her tired voice. You learn to take care of yourself when you live alone. He brought her the tea and sat beside her on the settee. Drink that. It will help warm you from the inside. She sipped obediently, making a face at the bitter taste. What is in this? Tea and whiskey. Dr. Hayes sent it along, said it would help prevent chill. It tastes terrible. Never said it would taste good, just said it would help. Preston watched her drink, satisfied when some color started returning to her cheeks. Hungry. I could make some stew. Maybe in a bit. Right now I just want to sit here with you and be grateful we are both alive. Preston could not argue with that. He pulled her against his side, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire crackle and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. The cattle were lowing softly in the distance, and somewhere an owl hooted. Preston. Florence's voice was quiet. When you jumped in after me, did you hesitate at all? No, not even for a second. You could have died. The river could have taken us both. I know. He kissed the top of her head. But a life without you in it is not one I want to live, so really there was no choice at all. Florence was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. I love you. I have been trying to find the right time to say it, the perfect moment, but after today, I realize there might not always be perfect moments. Sometimes you just have to say what is in your heart before it is too late. Preston felt his own eyes sting with unexpected tears. "I love you too, Florence. Have since the day you showed up at my ranch with that envelope of money and that stubborn set to your chin. Maybe even before that." She turned in his arms so she could look at him properly. "When I left Philadelphia, I thought I was giving up on the idea of love, at least for a long time. I thought independence and love could not coexist. But you have shown me I was wrong. Loving you does not make me less free. It makes me more myself, more certain of who I am and what I want." "And what do you want?" Preston asked, even though he thought he knew the answer. A life we build together where we both get to be exactly who we are." She touched his face, her fingers gentle against his jaw. "I want to teach and come home to you. I want to learn about ranching and watch you build your dreams. I want children someday, a family we create together. I want to grow old with you, sitting on a porch and watching the sunset over land we love." "That sounds perfect to me." Preston covered her hand with his. "Though maybe we could move the wedding up. I do not want to wait until the end of October. I want you to be my wife as soon as possible." Florence smiled. "Eager, are you? After almost losing you today?" "Absolutely. I do not want to waste a single unnecessary day. Life is too short and too uncertain." "Then let us get married next week," Florence said decisively. "Just a simple ceremony, nothing fancy. I do not need a big wedding, I just need you. Next week it is." Preston sealed the promise with a kiss, soft and sweet, and full of all the love he felt. True to his word, he set Florence up in the spare room that night, though it cost him to walk away and close the door between them. He checked on her several times through the night, and each time found her sleeping peacefully, her breathing deep and even. By morning, she was clearly on the mend, sitting up in bed and demanding breakfast with a return of her usual spirit. News of the near drowning spread through Wasco with predictable speed, and by the time Preston brought Florence back to town the next day, they were met with a mixture of concern, curiosity, and approval. Most people seemed to feel that Preston's heroic rescue only confirmed what a good match they were, though there were a few disapproving looks about Florence having spent the night at his ranch. Florence met those looks with her chin lifted and her spine straight, not apologizing or explaining. Preston admired her for it, for refusing to be cowed by other people's small-minded judgment. They went to see Reverend Thomas Caldwell together and arranged for a wedding the following Sunday, giving them just 6 days to prepare. Those days passed in a blur of activity. Florence moved her few belongings from the boarding house to Preston's ranch, transforming the spare room into a proper bedroom for when they had guests. She also insisted on helping with the ranch work, wanting to learn everything about the life they would be sharing. Preston taught her how to mend fences, how to read the signs of weather changes, how to spot when a cow was about to calve. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch together, talking and planning. Florence told him she wanted to continue teaching, at least for now, and Preston assured her he supported that completely. He would adjust his work schedule to make sure she could get to town safely each day. They talked about building a bigger house eventually, one with room for the children they both hoped to have. They talked about expanding the herd, about maybe getting some chickens, about all the small and large dreams that make up a shared life. The wedding itself was simple and perfect. Florence wore a new dress in pale blue that made her eyes shine, and Preston wore his best suit, freshly pressed for the occasion. A handful of friends and neighbors attended, including Dr. Hayes, the proprietor Silas Mort, and several of Florence's students with their parents. When Reverend Caldwell asked Preston to state his vows, he took Florence's hands in his and spoke from the heart. "Florence, you are the bravest, smartest, most stubborn woman I have ever met, and I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You make me want to be better, to build something worthy of you. I promise to support your dreams, to respect your independence, and to hold your hand through whatever challenges come our way. I promise to love you with everything I have for all the days of my life." There were not many dry eyes in the small church, and Florence had to blink back tears as she spoke her own vows. "Preston, you saved my life in more ways than one. You showed me that love does not have to mean losing yourself, that partnership can mean becoming more fully who you are meant to be. I promise to stand beside you, to work with you, to build a life and a home that is ours together. I promise to love you fiercely and honestly, today and always." When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed Florence with gentle reverence, aware of all the eyes on them but caring only about the woman in his arms. She kissed him back, smiling against his lips, and he felt a happiness so complete it seemed impossible that life could get any better than this moment. But it did get better. The first months of their marriage were an adjustment, learning to live together and navigate the small compromises that any shared life requires. Florence continued teaching, riding into town each morning and returning each afternoon to help with ranch work. Preston adjusted his schedule around hers, making sure he was always there to ride with her, not wanting her on the road alone. They worked together to improve the ranch, and Florence proved to have a sharp mind for the business side of things, keeping meticulous records and finding ways to save money on supplies. Preston taught her more about cattle and horses, and she soaked up the knowledge with the same enthusiasm she brought to her teaching. At night, they would fall into bed exhausted but happy, and Preston would hold his wife close and marvel at how much his life had changed in just a few short months. He had gone from being a solitary man focused only on building his ranch to being part of a partnership that made everything richer and more meaningful. Winter came, cooler but nothing like the harsh winters of the East, and they spent long evenings by the fire, reading together or just talking. Florence taught Preston more about literature and history, subjects he had never had much formal education in, and he found he loved learning when she was the teacher. Preston taught Florence more about the practical skills of ranch life, and she proved to be a quick study with an unexpected talent for working with horses. In the spring, Florence discovered she was pregnant. She told Preston one evening after dinner, simply and directly, watching his face for his reaction. Preston was struck speechless for a moment, then broke into the widest smile Florence had ever seen on his face. "Really? We are going to have a baby?" "Yes. Dr. Hayes confirmed it today. I am about 3 months along, he thinks. The baby should arrive in early fall." Preston crossed the room in 2 strides and swept her into his arms, spinning her around before remembering himself and setting her down gently. "Sorry, should not have done that. Are you all right? Do you feel well?" "Should you be sitting down?" Florence laughed at his sudden nervousness. "I am fine, Preston. Pregnant women do not break, though I will appreciate it if you stop spinning me around. It makes the nausea worse." "You have been having nausea. Why did not you tell me?" "Because it is normal and there was nothing to tell. But now that you know, perhaps you could help by not cooking bacon in the mornings. The smell has been rather difficult lately." "Done. No more bacon. I will cook whatever you need, whatever does not make you sick." Preston pulled her close again, more carefully this time, and rested his hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. A child that is part you and part me. I can hardly believe it. I know. It feels miraculous and terrifying all at once." Florence covered his hand with hers. "Preston, I want to keep teaching as long as I can. Is that all right with you?" "Of course it is. You love teaching. Why would I want you to give that up? Some men would expect their wives to stay home once they are with child. I am not some men." Preston kissed her forehead. You teach as long as you want and feel able. We will figure out everything else as we go." Florence did continue teaching through the spring and into early summer, finally stopping in July when the heat and her expanding belly made the daily trip to town too uncomfortable. She spent those last months before the baby arrived preparing the small spare room as a nursery, sewing tiny clothes and blankets while Preston built a cradle from oak, wood he had been saving for something special. Their daughter was born on a clear September evening, arriving with lusty cries that announced her presence to the world. Preston held Florence's hand through the labor, ignoring Dr. Hayes's suggestion that he wait outside like most men did. He wanted to be there, to support his wife through the pain and the struggle, and Florence gripped his hand with surprising strength and told him she loved him between contractions. When the doctor finally placed the baby in Florence's arms, both parents stared in wonder at the tiny, perfect human they had created. She had Preston's pale blue eyes and Florence's dark hair, and she was the most beautiful thing either of them had ever seen. "What should we name her?" Preston asked, one finger gently stroking his daughter's impossibly soft cheek. "I was thinking Rose Ann Young." Florence looked up at him. "What do you think?" "I think it is perfect, just like her, just like you." Preston kissed Florence's forehead, then leaned down to press a gentle kiss to his daughter's head. "Welcome to the world, Rose Ann. We have been waiting for you." The next months were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Rose proved to be a healthy, happy baby who rarely fussed, unless she was hungry or needed changing. Preston was a devoted father, taking his turn walking the floor when Rose was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, and staring at his daughter with an expression of such pure love that it made Florence's heart ache in the best possible way. Florence found herself surprised by how much she loved being a mother. She had expected to miss teaching more, to feel restless at home, but instead she found deep satisfaction in caring for their daughter and managing their growing household. She did miss her students, though, and made plans to return to teaching part-time once Rose was a bit older, perhaps taking the baby with her to the schoolhouse. Preston's ranch continued to prosper. With Florence managing the books and making smart financial decisions, they were able to expand the herd and purchase additional land. Other ranchers in the area began to respect Preston as a successful, reliable neighbor, and he started to be included in discussions about water rights and grazing regulations. By the time Rose was a year old, toddling around the ranch on unsteady legs and chattering in her own language, Preston and Florence had truly built the life they had dreamed of. The house had been expanded with an additional bedroom and a proper dining room. The barn was full of healthy cattle and several good horses. The land was productive and well maintained. One evening in early fall, they sat on the porch together watching the sunset, Rose asleep in Florence's arms after an exhausting day of exploration. Preston had his arm around his wife's shoulders, and they were both quiet, simply enjoying the peace of the moment. "You ever think about that day at the river?" Florence asked softly. "When I nearly drowned." "Sometimes," Preston admitted. "Usually when I wake up in the middle of the night and reach for you to make sure you are real, that I did not lose you. I think about it too, about how close we came to never having this." She gestured to encompass everything, their home, their sleeping daughter, the land stretching out before them. "It makes me grateful for every single day." "Me too." Preston pressed a kiss to her temple. "Though I have to say, I am glad our life has been a bit calmer since then. I do not think my heart could take another scare like that." Florence laughed quietly, careful not to wake Rose. "I promise to stay out of rivers from now on." "Appreciated." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, and then Preston said, "I love you, Florence Young." more than the day I married you, which I did not think was possible. I love you too, Preston. Thank you for jumping into that water after me. Thank you for not hesitating, for finding my hand when everything was dark and terrifying. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for letting me. Preston tightened his arm around her shoulders. Thank you for choosing me, for staying, for making this ranch a home instead of just a place. It was always you, Florence said, leaning into him. From the moment you paid my debt at the general store, even though I was prickly and proud. My heart knew before my head did. Preston smiled in the gathering darkness. Mine too. They sat there until the stars came out, painting the sky with pinpricks of light, and little Rose stirred in her mother's arms, making small sleeping sounds. This was everything Preston had worked for, everything he had dreamed of during those long, lonely years before Florence came into his life. A home, a family, a partner who made him better than he would have been alone. And it had all started with a moment of pure terror and desperate love, with his hand finding hers beneath the dark water and refusing to let go. As the years passed, their family grew. Rose was joined by a brother, James, 2 years later, and then another daughter, Clara, 2 years after that. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in Kern County. Florence eventually returned to teaching part-time, bringing her children with her to the schoolhouse, and showing a whole generation of students what it looked like when a woman could be both a mother and an educator. Preston became known as a fair, honest rancher who treated his workers well and always kept his word. He served on the town council and helped mediate disputes between neighbors. But his greatest pride was always his family, the life he had built with Florence, the children they were raising together. Rose grew into a strong-willed young woman who loved horses and had her mother's quick intelligence. James was quieter, thoughtful, with a talent for working with wood like his father. Clara was the wild one, always getting into mischief and keeping her parents on their toes. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston took Florence back to the San Joaquin River, to the spot where she had nearly drowned. They had not been back since that terrible day, both of them carrying too many difficult memories of the place. But Preston felt it was time to reclaim it, to turn it from a site of trauma into something better. They stood on the bank together, hands clasped, watching the water flow past. It looked different in the morning light, less menacing, just a river doing what rivers do. "I am glad we came here," Florence said. "I needed to see it again, to remember that terrible things can lead to beautiful outcomes. If you had not fallen in, if I had not jumped in after you, we might have taken months longer to really commit to each other," Preston mused. "Not that I would ever want you to nearly drown again, but that day crystallized everything for me, made me realize I could not waste time being cautious when I loved you so much. I felt the same way. When I was going under, when I thought I might die, all I could think was that I would never get to marry you, never get to build the life we had talked about. That regret was almost worse than the fear." Florence turned to face him. "But you saved me. Your hand found mine in all that darkness and chaos, and you pulled me back to life." "I will always find you," Preston said, cupping her face in his hands. "No matter where you are, no matter what stands between us, I will always find my way back to you." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 10 years of love and partnership and shared life. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. "Should we head back?" Florence asked. "The children will be wondering where we are in a minute." Preston pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I just want to stand here with you a bit longer, be grateful for everything we have, everything we survived to get here." Florence wrapped her arms around his waist and held on tight. "I am grateful too, every single day." They stood there by the river that had nearly claimed Florence's life, the same river that had forced them to confront the depth of their feelings, the same river that had become part of their story. And they were happy, deeply and completely happy, in the way that only comes from choosing each other every day, through challenges and joys, through near tragedies and quiet triumphs. When they finally rode back to the ranch, they found their 3 children playing in the yard, watched over by the hired hand they had trusted to keep them safe. Rose was showing her siblings how to braid rope, her young face serious with concentration. James was building something with scrap wood, his tongue caught between his teeth the way Preston's was when he focused. Clara was supposed to be helping, but was mostly just running in circles, her laughter bright on the morning air. Florence and Preston sat on their horses for a moment, just watching, just taking it all in. This was their legacy, Preston thought. Not just the ranch or the land or the cattle, but these children, this love, this life they had built together from nothing but determination and faith in each other. "Come on," Florence said, already dismounting. "Let us go be with our family." Preston followed her down, and as they walked toward their children, Rose looked up and saw them. Her face split into a huge grin and she came running, James and Clara right behind her. They crashed into their parents in a tangle of arms and laughter, and Preston felt his heart swell almost painfully with love. This was everything. This moment, this family, this woman who had chosen him and kept choosing him every single day. He looked at Florence over the tops of their children's heads and saw his own feelings reflected in her eyes. They had both taken risks to get here, had both chosen courage over comfort, had both believed that something better was possible even when the path was unclear, and they had been right. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the California earth, the young family headed inside for breakfast. There would be work to do later, there always was on a ranch, but for now there was just this. Family and love and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. Preston took Florence's hand as they walked, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. She squeezed back, and he knew she was thinking the same thing he was. How lucky they were. How close they had come to losing it all. How grateful they were for every moment they had been given. The years continued to pass, marked by small joys and occasional challenges. Rose grew up and married a neighboring rancher's son, staying close to home and starting her own family. James discovered a talent for veterinary medicine and went away to study, though he came home regularly and eventually opened a practice in Wasco. Clara turned out to have her mother's gift for teaching and took over Florence's role at the schoolhouse when Florence finally decided to retire. Preston and Florence grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces etched with lines earned from laughter and sun and years of living. The ranch was eventually passed down to Rose and her husband, while Preston and Florence moved into a smaller house on the property, content to advise and watch their grandchildren grow. On warm evenings, they would sit on their porch, holding hands and watching the sunset just as they had done for decades. Sometimes they talked, sharing memories and dreams and observations about their expanding family. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from years of knowing each other so completely that words become optional. Preston never forgot the feeling of Florence's hand in his beneath that river water, the desperate relief of finding her and pulling her back to life. It remained the most terrifying and most clarifying moment of his existence, the point where everything that mattered became crystal clear. Florence never forgot the feeling of sinking, of her strength giving out, of preparing to let go. And then the miracle of his hand closing around hers, strong and sure, pulling her back from the darkness. It remained her touchstone for what love really meant. Someone who would dive into danger without hesitation, who would find you even in the darkest waters, who would hold on and never let go. They lived long, full lives, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper across generations, a testament to the foundation Preston and Florence had built together. Their story became family legend, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder that true love is worth any risk, that courage and commitment can overcome any obstacle. And always, at the heart of the story, was that moment in the river. She was going under the third time when the cowboy hit that water, and his hand finally found hers. Everything that came after, all the love and life and family, grew from that single moment of desperate courage and unshakable devotion. When Preston was 78 and Florence 74, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by their entire extended family. The celebration was held at the ranch, with tables set up under the open sky and enough food to feed a small army. Children ran everywhere, and the air was full of laughter and music, and the sound of people who loved each other enjoying being together. As the sun began to set, casting that familiar golden light across the land, Preston pulled Florence out to dance. She went willingly, still fitting perfectly in his arms after all these years. They moved slowly to the music, not caring that they were not particularly graceful, just happy to be together. 50 years, Florence murmured against his shoulder. Who would have thought? I would have, Preston replied. From the moment I pulled you out of that river, I knew you were mine for life. I would have bet on 50 years and 50 more after that if I could. I love you, Florence said, the words still carrying the same weight they had the first time she spoke them. I have loved you for 50 years, and I will love you for however many more we are given. I love you too. Preston kissed her forehead, then her lips, soft and sweet and full of decades of devotion. Thank you for almost drowning so I could save you. Florence laughed, pulling back to swat his arm lightly. Preston Young, that is a terrible thing to say. Maybe, but it is true. He was grinning, unrepentant. Best worst day of my life. Mine too, Florence admitted, her eyes twinkling. Though I could have done without the actual near-death experience. The falling in love part was wonderful enough on its own. They danced until the song ended, then stayed on the makeshift dance floor, swaying gently to the sound of their family celebrating around them. This was their legacy, Preston thought again. Not just the land or the ranch or even the children, but this. A love that had endured and deepened across 5 decades, that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger, that had become the foundation for multiple generations of family. When they finally sat down, exhausted but happy, they were immediately surrounded by grandchildren wanting stories, great-grandchildren climbing into laps, children and in-laws making sure they had food and drink. Florence looked at Preston across the chaos, and they shared a smile that held 50 years of private jokes and shared memories and deep, abiding love. That night, after everyone had finally gone home or to bed, Preston and Florence sat alone on their porch one last time. The stars were brilliant overhead and the night air was cool and sweet. It has been a good life, Florence said quietly. Better than I ever imagined possible when I left Philadelphia all those years ago. The best, Preston agreed, though I think we earned it. We worked hard, loved harder, and never gave up on each other. Never, Florence confirmed. She was quiet for a moment, then added, Preston, when my time comes, I want you to know that I have no regrets. None. Every choice I made led me to you, to this life, and I would not change a single thing. Florence, his voice cracked slightly. Let us not talk about that yet. We have years left. Maybe, but I want you to know anyway. She took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "You saved my life that day in the river, but you also gave me a life worth living. You showed me what real partnership looks like, what it means to be loved completely and to love completely in return. That is a gift beyond measure." Preston pulled her close, holding her as he had held her countless times over the years, feeling the familiar shape of her against him. "You gave me the same gift. I was just existing before you, Florence. Working and surviving but not really living. You made everything mean something. You made me whole." They sat there under the stars, two people who had chosen each other against all odds and had built something beautiful and lasting. The ranch was quiet around them, settled in for the night, but Preston could feel the life pulsing through it. His descendants sleeping in various buildings, the cattle in the fields, the horses in the barn. All of it connected back to that moment in the river, to the choice he made to jump in without hesitation, to the miracle of his hand finding hers in the murky water. Preston and Florence lived several more years together, their health gradually failing, but their love never diminishing. They faced the decline with the same partnership they had brought to everything else, supporting each other through difficulties, finding joy in small moments, never losing sight of how lucky they were to have found each other. When Florence passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 79, Preston was holding her hand, just as he had been holding it, literally or figuratively, for nearly 60 years. The grief was immense, a physical ache that never fully went away, but he also felt gratitude that they had been given so many years together, that she had not died in that river at 22, that they had built a life and a family that would continue long after both of them were gone. Preston followed her 2 years later, his heart simply giving out one morning as he sat on the porch watching the sunrise. His last thoughts were of Florence, of diving into that river, of the relief and joy of his hand finding hers. He died with a slight smile on his face, and those who found him said he looked peaceful, ready, like a man who had lived well, and was prepared to move on to whatever came next. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names, dates, and a single line Preston had requested years earlier. His hand found hers. The ranch continued for generations, eventually becoming a historical landmark, the Young family story preserved as part of California's ranching heritage. Every descendant learned the tale of Preston and Florence, of how she nearly drowned and he saved her, of how that moment of crisis became the foundation for a love story that spanned decades and created a legacy that endured. And sometimes, on clear autumn evenings when the light turned golden and soft, people swore they could see two figures sitting on the old porch, holding hands and watching the sunset together. Just a trick of the light, probably, or the power of a story well told and often repeated. But maybe, just maybe, it was Preston and Florence, still together after all these years, still holding on to each other, still grateful for the moment when she was going under the third time, and the cowboy hit that water and his hand finally found hers, changing both their lives forever. The end.